Russian President Vladimir Putin made some surprise statements today over the crisis in Ukraine. This afternoon, he called on pro-Russian separatists to postpone their planned secession vote on May 11th. He announced that he has withdrawn Russian military forces from Ukraine's border, and he even offered conditional support for national elections in late May, which he had previously rejected.
I want to underline that the planned presidential elections in Kiev are a move in the right direction. But they won't solve anything if all of the citizens of Ukraine don't understand how their rights will be guaranteed after these elections are held.
A White House spokesman said this afternoon that there is no evidence that Russian troops have pulled back, and the U.S. imposed further economic penalties on Moscow. To help us walk through what these new developments mean, I am joined by Angela Stent. She's director of the Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies at Georgetown University. She has served in the State Department and at the National Intelligence Council. And Stephen Cohen. He's professor emeritus of Russian Studies and Politics at New York University and Princeton University. And welcome to you both back to the program. Angela, Stent, to you first. Do you believe that the Russians are pulling back their troops from the border?
I think we don't know that yet, but I still think that the announcements that President Putin made today were an important step in the right direction to diffusing the crisis, particularly discouraging a referendum from taking place next Sunday, and also given this the support for the election on May 21st in Kiev. So I think the gesture was important, the words were important. I think we have to see whether they really do withdraw their troops. But I think he realizes that the situation was really spiraling out of control in eastern Ukraine with increasing violence and casualties.
Stephen Cohen, do you think they are pulling the troops back?
I have no way of knowing, but Putin addressed this question. He said, if you don't believe it, speaking to the United States, you can check it out. You have your space surveillance. There's something more. I haven't seen the Russian text, but the English translation by the Russians, which is usually reliable, uses the past tense. He says, we have withdrawn our troops. That means we are not doing it now or we're going to do it tomorrow. We have done it. So someone here is misleading someone, which reminds us that as we move toward the possibility of war with Russia, the entire atmosphere is full of so much misinformation. We have to sort it out. But I do not believe that Putin would lie about something this important.
Do you think he could be not telling the truth and saying what is not going to happen?
I mean, he told Chancellor Merkel a few weeks ago that Russia was withdrawing troops, and there's no independent verification that any of that happened. I mean, again, none of us know. I mean, it's possible that they'll withdraw them somewhat. They're apparently conducting other exercises, but we really don't know. It's possible that he's not telling the truth, but I think if, again, by endorsing the May 25th election and by pulling back on the referendum that is supposed to take place on Sunday, I think he is signaling that Russia does want to have a say in what happens after this May 25th election, and it's willing to talk.
Steve Cohen, how do you read these other new declarations by Putin, whether the troops are moving or not?
Well, that's right. We have to read the whole statement. It's not very long. It looks like he spoke for about 5 or 6 minutes. But he said many important things. First, he reiterated the Russian position that we, the United States, created this crisis along with Europe, and that Russia is aggrieved. Then he went on to say, though, I watched the video, the footage of what happened in Odessa on Friday, and that was a horrific event. And you have to remember that for people who live in Russia and Ukraine in particular, it evokes memories of people burning during World War II, not just Jews, but the fact that the Nazis in those territories locked people in buildings and burned them to death. I've talked to Russian friends in Crimea and in larger Russia. They were all horrified by what they saw, and so was Putin. And so he said, I'm going to take a step to try to stop this. We have withdrawn our troops or pulled them back from the Ukrainian border. I think we have to assume that's true unless surveillance says he's not telling the truth. And then he clearly wants 2 things in return, which need to be mentioned, and we'll see if he gets them. He wants the United States to tell Kiev to to pull its military forces out of eastern Ukraine. And then he revealed something I didn't know. Maybe Angela knew it, maybe you folks knew it, but he said that in a phone call with German Chancellor Merkel, she had proposed a roundtable of all the aggrieved parties in Ukraine. That's Kiev, that's Western Ukraine, that's Eastern Ukraine, to talk about the future of Ukraine, which means a new constitution. And he says that he agrees with that, and he will support that. So you have, it appears, if he's telling the truth, Germany, Europe more generally, and Russia in favor of this roundtable. Now, the United States, so far as I know, is silent. And in fact, when Merkel was here, was it just a few days ago?
Right.
I don't recall it being part of what they reported they discussed. So if Putin's telling the truth, the United States seems to be dragging its feet. Well, I don't know, but that's the impression we have.
We clearly need some more clarification. Right. But Angela Stent, why is Putin doing this? How do you read?
Well, I think part of it is, the threat of further sanctions. Both Chancellor Merkel and President Obama said that if Russia interfered with the May 25th election, there would be tougher sanctions. They might be unilateral, or they might be Europe and the U.S. And sanctions are already having effect on the Russian economy. They're deterring investors from new projects, from banks from lending money. So I think that's one clear reason why he did that. And also, there is the possibility that, after the election, I mean, I agree that everyone will sit down, but I think the sequencing is important here.
This is the May 25th
election. The issue of Ukraine's future neutrality is on the table, and the Ukrainian politicians themselves are willing to discuss this. And the question of constitutional change, devolving more power to the regions, not a federal state in the way that Russia wants it, but certainly giving them more autonomy. So there is room for bargaining, there is room for negotiation, but you do have to have everyone at the table there.
And that's what Steve Cohen was referring to a minute ago. Steve Cohen, do you think sanctions are part of what's driving any possible change of heart or change of thinking on Putin's part?
No. I think Angela's wrong on this. I agree with much of what she says, but not that. The sanctions hurt, but this issue of Ukraine is existential for Russia. Everybody who's involved in policymaking in Russia sees this as essential to Russia's future. I mean, its future in the long term, what happens in Ukraine. And if it costs a few billion or even $1 trillion, Russia will not back off. I think that what flipped Putin into a more serious mode is that he is convinced that we are a couple spits from civil war in Ukraine, and that if Ukraine goes into civil war, Russian and American or NATO troops may be drawn in. That's what he said. That's my reading of the situation too. And I think sanctions are a sidebar, a secondary issue.
Why do you disagree?
Well, because I think that the civil war, the incipient civil war that already exists in eastern Ukraine, is partly supported by Russia. Now, I don't think Russia dictates what the separatists do, but Russian forces and special forces have obviously been involved there. And I think now they're realizing maybe this has gone further and the violence has gone further. I don't think we're on the brink of a war between the West and Russia, but I think there are serious concerns. But I also do think that the effect on the Russian economy is palpable, and it's going to get much worse if they're tougher sanctions.
Steve Cohen, her point is if the Russians are behind the unrest in the East, it doesn't make sense that they'd be worried about civil war.
All right, let me make a theatrical statement, because we don't have time to really debate this. There are Russian agents in eastern Ukraine. There are also American agents, and Lithuanian, and Polish, and God knows what other agents there. But to say that the Russians created this unrest in eastern Ukraine, and that Putin can call it off tomorrow, that he can go on Russian or Ukrainian television and say, guys, vacate the buildings, go home, hand over your weapons, that's a fantasy. Moreover, it obscures what lies at the bottom of this entire Ukrainian crisis, and that's the conflicts in Ukraine. Ukraine had one state in February. It was never one country. And that was what we're now seeing. I mean, we're now seeing 2 or 3 Ukraines at war with each other. Putin doesn't control this, and I think maybe, one reason he spoke today is he knows Russia can't control the situation either.
We hear you both, Stephen Cohen, Angela Stent, and we thank you.